Divert power to chest RT.
Nothing's gonna stand in my way.
This time, I'm going to bring you a summary of a movie that you might already be familiar with, even if you've watched it many times. Yep, we will discuss Iron Man, a 2008 release. Maybe some of you have watched this movie a dozen, even dozens of times. Or maybe you've also seen the abridged version in various other places. But trust me, with this special spice from the mouth, the vibes will feel different, more exciting, deeper, and might make you watch the movie again.
Tony Stark.
The story opens at a prestigious awards show in the United States. The main focus of the movie is a genius, visionary, and true patriot named Tony Stark. He is the heir and leader of the largest weapons company in the world, Stark Industries. After the death of his father, Howard Stark, the company was temporarily led by his family friend, Obadiah Stane. Now, Tony has grown up and taken over full leadership, making Stark Industries even more successful.
Tony Stark has changed the face of the weapons
To present this year's Apogee Award to Mr. Tony Stark.
However, instead of taking business seriously, Tony is seen gambling and having fun. Even his close friend, Colonel James Rhodes, Rhodey, has to be patient with Tony's casual behavior.
All right, tomorrow, don't be late. Yeah, you can count on it. I'm serious. I know.
The next morning, we are invited to enter a super luxurious and futuristic residence in Malibu, California. This is Tony Stark's headquarters and home. Apart from being known as a weapons creator, Tony also has a hobby of building and modifying vehicles. He is accompanied by an artificial intelligence-based robotic assistant named Jarvis, who is always ready to analyze and simplify Tony's every task. Tony is known to rely heavily on automated systems in his home. It just so happens that today Tony is scheduled to meet with the military to demonstrate his latest weapon. But in his casual style, he was deliberately late for 3 hours. This clearly annoys Rhodey, and not for the first time. Despite Tony's brilliant brain and abundant wealth, his reckless and arbitrary personality often annoys those around him. Even when he was on board the military plane, he still tempted Rhodey with liquor. But Rhodey was still not interested in making peace.
I'm not drinking. I don't want any. That's what I'm talking about. When I get up in the morning,
Upon their arrival in the barren desert far from American civilization, Tony began to show off his latest weapon to military officials. He introduced the latest missile technology called Jericho. The missile Tony introduced only needed to be launched once, but its effect could rival that of dozens of regular missiles, a terrifying innovation with tremendous destructive power. Instead of returning to base by plane, Tony chooses to join a convoy of military troops in a special combat jeep. Throughout the trip, the atmosphere was relaxed. Tony laughed, cracked jokes, and even posed for pictures with the soldiers. But the happiness didn't last long. Suddenly, their convoy was ambushed by an extremist armed group. Ironically, the attackers were using weapons manufactured by his own company Stark Industries. In the chaos, Tony was hit by an explosion and a missile fragment embedded in his chest, causing serious near-fatal injuries. When he regained consciousness, he found himself trapped in a cave used as a base by an extremist group called the Ten Rings. Weakened, his chest is now attached to a large battery connected to an electromagnetic device. The device is meant to keep metal fragments from moving toward his heart, because if they do, his life will be in danger.
What I did? What I did is to save your life.
It was here that he met Ensign, a fellow prisoner who had been brought in by the group to accompany and assist Tony during his captivity. Ensign becomes not only a friend, but also an important figure who helps him survive mentally and physically.
من أصدقائنا الرؤساء الأمريكان.
The Ten Rings' goal is clear. They want Tony to rebuild the Jericho missile for them. But Tony soon realizes that whether he complies or resists, his fate will be the same death. Thanks to Inson's support and encouragement, Tony's will to survive is reignited. With his strategy and cleverness, Tony pretends to agree to the kidnapper's request.
Here, I don't care if it's acetylene or propane. In my workstation, I want it well lit. I want it to be up. I need well.
Mongolian, Farsi, Russian. Get that basura.
0.15 grams.
But secretly, instead of building a missile, he designed something completely different, a mini arc reactor. This would replace the large battery in his chest, and provide a more stable and lightweight energy source to hold the metal fragments. But that was not all. Tony also began developing his secret project, an armored suit of armor that he designed himself as a way out of the hellish cave. With Inson's help, they worked non-stop day and night, utilizing the makeshift equipment available in the place which was actually reserved for making missiles. As the days passed, the members of the extremist group became suspicious. They felt there was something wrong with what Tony was doing. The leader of the group, a violent man named Raza, finally came in person to check on the progress of the weapons. He demanded that Tony immediately show the results of the promised Jericho missile project.
Good assistant.
Time was ticking away, and Tony realized he couldn't linger. He accelerated work on his armor. In that moment, Inson became the first person to witness the early form of the future hero's legendary mask, and a silent witness to the birth of the superhero icon that would one day rock the world, Iron Man. The next day, Raza, the leader of the extremist group, became suspicious after looking at the CCTV footage. He realizes that Tony is not working on the project as instructed. He immediately sent 2 of his men to do a spot check.
Jensen, stop! Experts! Experts!
At the time, Tony still hadn't fully completed the activation process of his armor system. His position was precarious. As luck would have it, the explosive trap they set on the door went off just as Raza's 2 men tried to enter. The blast killed them on the spot, giving Tony a little extra time. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough to perfect his armor preparations. In the heat of the moment, Inson made a bold decision. She went ahead and sacrificed herself to buy time by attacking the other guards. Finally, Tony managed to activate his armor. With the brutal power of the armor, he went on a rampage and destroyed the guards one by one. The remaining surviving enemies chose to flee while blocking the cave's exit. But Tony kept going, until he finally managed to defeat Raza. Amidst the rubble and smoke of battle, Tony found Inson lying in a dying state. With his remaining breaths, Inson delivered his final, evocative message: "Don't waste your life, Tony. Use your time for something meaningful, and stop watching blue movies." That last sentence brought a bitter smile to Tony's face as he grieved the loss of his new friend. With fury and determination, Tony blew the 10 Rings base to smithereens. Unfortunately, his improvised armor began to malfunction. As a matter of urgency, he activated the thruster system on his legs to launch himself away from the site. Tony crash-landed in the middle of a barren desert, and had to walk for a full 2 hours before Rhodey and the military came to his rescue. Back in America, Instead of going straight to the hospital, Tony held a massive press conference. In a statement that shocked the public, he announced that Stark Industries would stop producing weapons.
As I can decide what the future.
He made the decision after realizing that the weapons he had created had brought more disaster than good. The statement certainly caused an uproar, especially from Obadiah Stane, a close associate and company bigwig, who feared they would lose their power and big business. But Tony remained steadfast. He already had a new vision for Stark Industries. Tony has now resumed work on his old project, the large version of the arc reactor, a clean energy source with revolutionary technology, similar to the mini reactor now embedded in his chest.
I want you to promise me.
Sometime after his controversial remarks at the press conference, his company's stock has plummeted, destabilizing the situation at Stark Industries. Not one to rest on his laurels, Tony has created an updated mini-reactor to replace the makeshift version he built in the cave. He also enlisted the help of Pepper Potts to replace his old reactor with the new one. Despite looking calm, Pepper is actually quite tense and nervous about the task.
Rocket launch is causing a little bit of a short. It's so hard. That was fun, right? I got it.
Moreover, Tony himself is known as a figure who does not like nostalgia, even unwilling to keep his old things. He casually tells Pepper to throw away and destroy the first version of the mini-reactor, even though it was his lifesaver when he was captured. Meanwhile, in the desert, Raza is still alive. He managed to find the wreckage of Tony's armor that was left behind after the escape. Full of curiosity and hidden ambitions, Raza brings the remnants of the armor to his new headquarters for further research with no idea what plans he will develop next. Back to Tony, he is now obsessed with developing his new armor. The project is called Mark II. It will be an evolution of the armor he used to make on a makeshift basis in a cave. With the help of Jarvis, his artificial intelligence, and much more advanced facilities, Tony believes he can create a much more modern and effective combat suit. The first step was to create a repulsor-powered jet shoe, which would be the prime mover when flying. For the first time, Tony conducted a test run in his own garage and, as you can guess, the results were rather messy.
2, 1.
Although it looked cool, the test run had Tony bouncing all over the place. However, he didn't give up. His next step was to improve the armor's hand parts, which also featured repulsors. This part is not only for flying, but can also emit laser-like energy beams, giving the armor offensive power. Since it was still in the experimental stage, Tony would often make mistakes. And yes, some of them were quite painful, from getting burned, to mentally hitting the wall, to rolling on the lab floor. But as always, he learned from his failures and continued to refine his designs. Going into the second big test, Tony tried to fly stably using the jet shoes as thrusters and the hands as direction control and body balancing. The result? Great success. Although still rough, Tony managed to take to the air for the first time without the aid of an airplane. Immediately, Tony moved on to the next stage, creating an outer layer of armor from protective steel, integrating it with Jarvis as a personal assistant inside his armor system.
Check.
And it's a historic moment. For the first time in his life, Tony Stark becomes the first human to fly freely in space without a conventional airplane. Now, his ambitions are skyrocketing. He wants to break the altitude record for winged aircraft, and keep flying, up, higher, as if the sky is no longer his limit. As Tony continued to fly through the sky and began to touch the upper atmospheric layers, an orange color covered the sky as he got closer to the edge of space. However, at that altitude, the extreme temperatures coated his armor with ice, causing the Jarvis system to shut down completely. Tony lost control and began a free fall from high altitude. Upon arriving home, Tony was greeted by a mysterious package from Pepper. Inside was an old version of the mini-arc reactor he used to survive. The reactor is now elegantly displayed in a transparent glass box, and underneath is a simple but heartfelt sentence. Proof that Tony Stark still has a heart. The inscription brought a smile to Tony's face. Despite looking like an arrogant man, Tony has always learned from the past and doesn't want to repeat the same mistakes. He immediately made major improvements to his armor. He replaced the material with a mixture of gold and titanium not only to make it look more elegant, but also to prevent ice from forming when flying at high altitudes. The mix of metals also made his armor lighter, yet still resilient to bullets and extreme air pressure. A few nights later, Tony attends a lavish red carpet event and exclusive party for billionaires, bigwigs, and celebrities. There, he had a chance encounter with Stan Lee, the legendary creator of Iron Man himself. The event was also attended by an agent named Coulson, who introduced himself as a representative of the government's logistics division. Coulson requested a special time to meet Tony to discuss something important. Being busy, Tony scheduled the meeting for Saturday, right at the Stark Industries weapons factory. But before he's done with one problem, he's approached by a female reporter who shows him gruesome photos of Stark Industries weapons being used in crimes against humanity. What's even more shocking is that all of this happened without Tony's knowledge. As it turns out, his company's board of directors had been selling weapons to illegal armed groups, including the Ten Rings terrorist organization. These weapons caused a lot of suffering, especially to innocent women and children. Feeling guilty and unable to remain silent, Tony reconfigured the repulsor on his hand so that it could be used as an offensive weapon. After Jarvis completed the development of the latest armor with gold and titanium coatings, Tony was ready to take on his first mission as a hero, not just a weapons manufacturer.
Either forced to join their militia.
At the same time, in a remote location, the Ten Rings group was exhibiting brutal cruelty. They were destroying small villages and capturing adult men as forced soldiers. In one village, a father flatly refused to join, not wanting to leave his wife and child behind. The terrorists decided to kill him on the spot. But at the most crucial moment, the sky suddenly thundered and a figure in golden armor appeared from the sky. Tony Stark in his new armor, Mark II. With his new armor now equipped with the latest technology, Tony has become much more formidable. In a critical situation where multiple criminals are about to execute their victims, he no longer needs to manually aim one by one. Thanks to the upgraded Jarvis system, targets can be automatically locked on simultaneously in just seconds. However, as Tony is flying home and enjoying his small success, an unidentified missile suddenly hurtles towards him. A massive explosion ensues, sending Tony crashing to the ground with a thud. But if the villains thought Iron Man was easy to defeat, they were sorely mistaken. Tony's new armor is not only bulletproof and capable of flight, but also fully armed to take on threats from the ground and air. After the incident, a new problem arose. While Tony was conducting a test flight in U.S. airspace, the air defense system detected him as a foreign object. They suspected it was a spy drone, and without thinking, 2 fighter jets were deployed to intercept and destroy it.
That's my exit.
He just went supersonic. I got it locked.
Among the pilots assigned, there was one familiar face, Rod, Tony's own best friend. When Rod realizes that their target is Tony in his armor, he is clearly shocked. But since his position doesn't allow him to reveal the truth to his partner, he can only stay silent and watch the misguided mission play out.
Sign this to come off, so...
Ow! Hey!
Due to the furor in the media, Tony was forced to hold a press conference to avoid further speculation and uproar. On the other hand, Obadiah, who had witnessed the news, seemed to have already begun devising his next cunning plan. Behind the scenes, it was revealed that the mastermind of Tony's kidnapping the other day was Obadiah himself. His goal is clear: he wants to take full control of Stark Industries. When he hears that Tony managed to create a state-of-the-art armor in the cave, Obadiah becomes interested in creating his own version. He teamed up with Raza, the leader of the kidnapping group, and took pieces of the Mark I armor for reference. This is the moment where Obadiah's true face is revealed. He shows his cruel and cunning nature by brutally paralyzing Raza, using a soundwave device, an old technology made by Tony that was rejected by the government. Afterwards, he took home all the Mark I armor parts with his troops. Meanwhile, Tony, who became suspicious of Obadiah's movements, asked Pepper Potts for help in tracing the company's confidential data. He felt something was wrong, and didn't want to be missed. When Pepper manages to get into Obadiah's personal computer, she opens a folder titled Kidnapping, and finds an astonishing video recording documenting the moment Tony was kidnapped by an armed group in the Middle East. The footage is clear evidence of Obadiah's involvement, and now, one by one, the pieces of the mystery begin to fall into place.
So.
Meanwhile, Obadiah, knowing that time is running out, forces his personal scientists to quickly complete a mock-up of a mini-arc reactor like the one in Tony's chest. But of course, they're no Tony Stark. Their brains and hands are no match for his genius.
I'm sorry. I'm not Tony.
Tony? Tony, are you there?
Tony.
Even so, Obadiah insisted on completing his own version of the giant armor, believing that it would be a revolutionary weapon capable of changing the course of world power. Ironically, Tony himself has dragged Pepper further into this conflict unknowingly.
This is your legacy.
Shortly after Obadiah left the base, a weakened Tony forced himself to crawl into his garage. He retrieves his old mini-arc reactor which, thankfully, Pepper didn't throw away. Around the same time, Rod, arrives at Tony's place, having been informed by Pepper about Obadiah's betrayal. Seeing Tony back on his feet and preparing himself, Rhodey can only encourage his friend. As Tony prepares to put on his new armor, Rhodey glances at the Mark I armor hanging.
Next time, baby.
Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Obadiah has arrived at the factory and installed his stolen reactor into his giant armor. With his new weapon, he escapes the facility, ready to spread terror. But Tony arrived just in time. He saved Pepper by ramming himself into Obadiah, sending them bouncing into the street. A fight broke out in the middle of the city, endangering motorists and pedestrians. The situation was almost catastrophic if Tony didn't act quickly. Realizing that Obadiah's armor didn't have an anti-icing system, Tony flew high into the sky, taking the fight into the air, where he could control it. His strategy was simple but clever: fly as high as possible into the cold air to trigger the formation of ice coating on the enemy armor. And sure enough, Obadiah's armor began to freeze and lose power.
Might want to look into it.
Tony now saw an opening for victory in sight. Tony thought the fight was over. He took off his gloves, thinking it was all over. But as it turned out, the danger hadn't really passed. While hiding behind the rubble, Tony contacts Pepper and asks her to blow up the giant arc reactor that powers the factory. His plan is unclear, but he seems to have a strategy. Determined, Tony climbed on top of Obadiah's armor, unplugging the visual camera cables built into his enemy's helmet. This forced Obadiah to remove his face shield, just as they were on top of the giant reactor. Tony knew his time was limited. Under a hail of gunfire from Obadiah, he held his ground while shouting to Pepper over the comms, asking her to press the trigger. Instantly, a massive bolt of electricity strikes Obadiah, sending him tumbling into a giant reactor that instantly explodes. The sound of the explosion echoes throughout the city. But miraculously, Tony survived, with the reactor on his chest still lit up, even though his body was nearly incapacitated. The next day, Tony was seen getting ready for a press conference, dressed up by Pepper to give the public an explanation of who the man behind Iron Man really is. But as we all know, Tony Stark is not the type to be set up or hide behind a lie. In the middle of the conference, when everyone expected Tony to deny, he proudly admitted that he was Iron Man.
I am Iron Man.
Suddenly, upon returning to his home, he was surprised by an uninvited visitor, a mysterious man who was already inside his house. The man introduced himself as Nick Fury, the director of a secret organization called S.H.I.E.L.D. He told Tony that if Stark thought he was the only superhero in the world, then he was wrong. Fury then reveals that they are working on a big project called The Avengers. I represent the entire team on duty. Thank you for watching until the end. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next video. See you.